Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring a really interesting piece of text. It's MCS 1 Kings 4.
hmm
Think of it as, well, uncovering some timeless ideas about leadership and building something lasting, all drawn from this key moment in ancient Israel.
Exactly. And it's more than just, an old record. It gives us this fascinating glimpse into King Solomon's early days on the throne, how his kingdom actually took shape.
Right.
So our goal today is really to dig into those themes of legacy, how he governed, and this element of, well, what the text presents as divine blessing or favor.
And see what still clicks for us today, right? For anyone interested in leadership, building something meaningful.
Precisely. It's about seeing those connections.
Okay, so let's dive in. The source material kicks off saying the kingdom passed on to Solomon from his father, David.
Huh.
And it specifically mentions David had instructed Solomon in the things of God. That feels like a pretty foundational piece right there, doesn't it? This passing on of values.
Oh, absolutely. It's a powerful starting point in the narrative. The text really seems to stress that this inheritance wasn't just, political power.
It was more.
Yeah, it included this transfer of core beliefs, of principles, which kind of makes you ask, doesn't it? What does it really mean to pass on those foundational values?
And how important is that for success down the line, whether you're talking a kingdom or, any big project?
That's a critical question. And it wasn't only spiritual guidance Solomon got, was it?
No, the text points out he ruled over all Israel. It highlights that David had unified the nation after a lot of battles, mind you.
Right, that's key.
Leaving Solomon a kingdom basically at peace. That's quite a head start, inheriting that kind of stability.
A huge advantage, no doubt. That peace, that unity, it was absolutely crucial. It gave Solomon the stable ground he needed,
To build on.
Exactly, to put in place all those administrative structures, the economic systems that really came to define his reign. It just underlines how often progress builds on what came before.
Makes you think, what would it have looked like if Solomon hadn't inherited that peace? If the kingdom was still, fractured?
A very different story,
Yeah.
likely. Then the text gives us this list, right? Solomon's top officials.
Yeah, at first glance, it might just seem like a list of names.
But the source we're looking at suggests there's maybe more going on here. It talks about families with a, quote, legacy of loyalty and obedience.
Ah, so not just random appointments then. What's the significance there?
Well, what's really interesting is this idea that maybe these weren't just based on individual merit at that moment. The mention of sons stepping into their father's roles sort of implies a system, right? Where certain families had built up this reputation over generations, competence, trustworthiness.
So like proven track records passed down.
Possibly. But it also makes you think, doesn't it? What were the societal expectations? What kind of maybe training happened within those families?
And were there downsides? Like, did it limit opportunities for people outside those established circles?
That's the potential flip side, yeah.
Yeah.
A system like that could become quite closed off.
It seems like this long-term view, though, this commitment to governance passed down, then the text shifts focus a bit.
Just practical stuff.
Yeah, how Solomon organized feeding the royal household, 12 officers, 12 districts, making sure everyone got provisions.
Right, the logistics of it all.
And the source connects that number 12 to this idea of divine authority. Can you expand on that a bit? What's that link?
Sure. In that ancient Israelite context, the number 12 pops up a lot. It often carries symbolic weight.
Like the 12 tribes.
Exactly. Representing the 12 tribes, sometimes signifying wholeness or divine order. So when the text ties this very practical administrative division to divine authority,
It's doing more than just talking about efficiency.
probably.
Yeah.
It would have added this layer of legitimacy, maybe even a sense of, God's stamp of approval on Solomon's whole system.
Which could have really helped with stability, getting people to accept his rule.
You'd think so. How might that perception have shaped things? It's interesting to consider.
And then, again, the text brings us back to legacy. It suggests these officials probably benefited from their father's standing or experience.
It keeps coming up.
It really does seem to be a major theme in this chapter. Why do you think there's such an emphasis on these inherited roles, these legacies?
Well, I think this repetition really hammers home how interconnected generations were seen in their society. The skills, the connections, even the reputation built by one generation.
Let's open doors for the next.
Precisely. It acts as this reminder, doesn't it, that our actions, the values we live by, their impact can stretch way beyond our own lifetime.
Yeah. Are there modern parallels you see? This idea of inherited opportunity or legacy in different areas today?
Oh, absolutely. You could argue it shows up in various fields, from business dynasties to political families, even certain professions sometimes. It's a complex dynamic.
Then the text paints this really vivid picture of prosperity in the kingdom. It says, Judah and Israel were as numerous as sand grains on the seashore. They ate, drank, and enjoyed themselves.
Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Like a real golden age.
It really does. But how much of that do you think was down to the foundations David laid versus Solomon's own doing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The text definitely gives credit to that inherited piece as a huge factor. You can't overlook that.
But Solomon must have done something right himself.
Oh, for sure. His organizational skills, which we see in how he managed resources efficiently, that administration we talked about, that would have played a massive role, too, in creating this environment where things could flourish.
So both. A strong foundation and effective leadership on top.
Often seems to be the recipe for those kinds of flourishing periods, yes. It takes both working together.
And the sheer scale of Solomon's daily needs, right? The text lists these huge amounts of flour, livestock. It really drives home the point about prosperity.
It does paint a picture of abundance.
But then the source makes this kind of interesting comparison to today, mentioning a possible legacy of dependence. What's that about? What's the suggestion there?
Yeah, that's a really thought-provoking turn. The comparison seems to be drawing a line between the kind of self-sufficiency described in Solomon's era.
The whole every man under his own vine and fig tree idea.
Exactly, that's symbolism, contrasting that with what it sees as maybe a greater reliance on external systems, on support networks in more modern times. It kind of nudges you to think about, well, what makes a society more or less independent? What builds resilience?
Interesting angle. Then the narrative takes another turn, focusing on Solomon's wisdom.
Ah, yes, his legendary wisdom.
Which the text describes as a direct gift from God, as well as a heart as vast as the sandy beach by the sea. That's quite the description.
It is, and his wisdom apparently became famous, spreading to all the nations around them.
So what do you make of this strong emphasis on wisdom coming directly from God?
Well, it highlights another really critical dimension to Solomon's reign, doesn't it? It's not just about strategy or administration.
There's something more.
The text attributes his success also to this divine favor, this exceptional understanding. It suggests that truly effective leadership might involve more than just, clever planning. It could include a deeper insight, a discernment.
And how would that kind of wisdom, whether you see it as divinely given or developed somehow, actually show up in practice, in leadership?
That's the key. Maybe in judgment calls, in diplomacy, in understanding people, in fostering that very prosperity we just discussed.
It even mentions he composed thousands of proverbs and songs.
Right. And his knowledge apparently covered everything from trees to animals. A real Renaissance man of his time.
People traveled from all over just to hear him speak. The source connects this to the idea of being the light. How does Solomon's wisdom, as it's shown here, link up with that concept?
That's a powerful connection. What seems compelling is that his wisdom wasn't just kept to himself. It wasn't just intellectual flexing.
It had an outward effect.
Exactly. It drew people in. It served as a kind of testament, perhaps, to something greater, as the text implies. So that analogy, being the light, suggests wisdom, when it's shared and used well, can actually illuminate things for others, influence them.
Okay, so let's try to pull the threads together quickly. We've seen Solomon inheriting this dual legacy from David, spiritual guidance, and a unified kingdom at peace.
Right, a strong starting point.
Then he sets up this very organized government. Seems like he had loyal officials, maybe from families with a history of service.
The structure.
Which leads to this period of remarkable prosperity where people are living well.
The flourishing.
And underpinning a lot of this, according to the text, is his extraordinary wisdom seen as a divine gift, which brings him international fame.
Precisely. It's that interplay, isn't it? The inherited foundation, the effective administration, and what's described as this divine blessing or wisdom.
They all seem central to understanding Solomon's early success, at least as 1 Kings 4 presents it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be just one single factor working on its own. It's the combination.
This really gives you something to chew on. Thinking about these examples of legacy and leadership we've talked through. The groundwork laid by others, the structures built, the role of wisdom or insight. It makes you ask, doesn't it? What kind of foundation are you building in your own life, your work?
Right.
And what kind of lasting impact might that have? Definitely some food for thought long after we wrap up this deep dive today.
Absolutely. And we'd really encourage you, if you're interested, to go explore 1 Kings chapter 4 yourself. see it in its full context.
There's always more there.
There really are layers here. And they continue to offer, I think, valuable lessons for anyone thinking about leadership, about legacy, and just about the principles that help build something that endures.